All right, how is everyone doing today? Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we try to help our viewers watch to grasp great theories of everything, ancient and modern, mostly obscure, tour de forces and theories of everything, and grand unified theories and cosmologies and earth-shattering theories. And we hope that you can use them, plug them into your consciousness for your paradigm shifting or your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health, your quest for more and more freedom. And we are on our second reading today, where we're taking a look at this 1991 book by the agent and Lee, and it is called The Dead Sea Scrolls Deception. So the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947 in Qumran, Palestine, or Israel, just what will soon become Israel anyway, and just about 10 or 15 miles from Jerusalem, and in a series of caves they have over there, and I think they're going to get into that story at a certain point, but this is just the this book is about, okay, they found all these ancient texts. Now, what are they going to do with them? You know, they have to, they're in ancient languages, particularly they have to figure out what to do with these things. Some of them are in better condition than others. Others have to be pieced together. You know, they're in 1,000 different pieces. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. And but they definitely, some of them are like very close copies of Old Testament books. I believe in the Dead Sea Scrolls they discovered a scroll of every one of the Old Testament books except for, I think, Ezra, or maybe Nehemiah. Just one book, I think, that they didn't find. But then they found a whole lot of other material. So, I guess the reason they probably started writing this book is because it was in the late 1980s, 40 years later, and the results are still pending. They still haven't told you what they say, because there's a lot of politics involved, and they're going to get into all that. So they are now about to quote Eisenman, Robert Eisenman, who wrote this book, Maccabean, Zadokites, Christians, and Qumran. And that kind of got their juices flowing, that they wanted to figure out what was going on with this. And so Eisenman is about to discuss the kind of how he sees the field as he comes into it. He comes into it in the 80s, and so he wasn't there back in the 40s and 50s when they were first kind of divvying up the work and stuff. Okay, according to Robert Eisenman, a small group of specialists, largely working together, developed a consensus in lieu of clear historical insight. Preconceptions and reconstructions, such as they were stated as facts. And these results, which were used to corroborate each other, in turn became new assumptions that were used to draw away a whole generation of students unwilling or simply unable to question the work of their mentors. The result has been the upholding of an official orthodoxy of interpretation, a framework of assumptions and conclusions which, to outsiders, appears to have the solidity of established and undisputed fact. In this fashion, many of the so-called données, or givens, of history were produced. Those responsible for developing the consensus view of Christianity have been able to exercise a monopoly over certain crucial sources, regulating the flow of information in a manner that enables its release to serve one's own purpose. This is a phenomenon explored by Umberto Eco in The Name of the Rose, where the monastery and the library within it reflect the medieval church's monopoly of learning, constituting a kind of closed shop, an exclusive country club of knowledge from which ill but a select few are banned. A select few prepared to toe the party line. This all sounds very familiar. Those purveying the party line can bolster the authority they arrogate to themselves by claiming that they alone have seen the relevant sources, access to which is closed to all outsiders. For outsiders, assembling the disparate available fragments into a coherent order amounts to an exercise in semiotics. And in the realm of semiotic exercises, it becomes perfectly possible to hold the Knights Templar responsible for everything. And Umberto Eco himself responsible for the collapse of the Banco Ambrosiano. Thus, most outsiders, in the absence of any access to the relevant sources, have no choice but to accept the interpretations of the party line. To challenge those interpretations is to find oneself labeled, at best a crank, at worst a renegade, apostate, or heretic. Few scholars have the combination of courage, standing, and expertise to issue such a challenge and hold on to their reputations. Robert Eisenman, whose currency and credibility have placed him among the most prominent and influential figures in his field, has done so. His story provided the impetus for this book. Okay, now this is section 1. Chapter 1 is called The Discovery of the Scrolls. East of Jerusalem, a long road slopes gradually down between barren hills sprinkled with occasional Bedouin camps. It sinks 3,800 feet to a depth of 1,300 feet below sea level, and then emerges to give a panoramic vista of the Jordan Valley. Away to the left, one can discern Jericho. In the haze ahead lie Jordan itself, and, as though seen in a mirage, the mountains of Moab. To the right lies the northern shore of the Dead Sea, the skin of water, and the yellow cliffs rising 1,200 feet or more, which line the Israeli side of it, conduce to awe and acute discomfort. The air here, so far below sea level, is not just hot, but palpably so, with a thickness to it, a pressure, almost a weight. The beauty, the majesty, and the silence of the place are spellbinding. So too is the sense of antiquity the landscape conveys. The sense of a world order, a world older than most Western visitors are likely to have experienced. It is therefore all the more shocking when the 20th century intrudes with a roar that seems to rupture the sky, a tight formation of Israeli F-16s or Mirages swooping low over the water. the pilots clearly discernible in their cockpits. After burners blasting, the jets surge almost vertically upwards into invisibility. One waits, numbed. Seconds later, the entire structure of cliffs judders to the receding sonic booms. Only then does one remember that this place exists, technically, in a state of permanent war, that this side of the Dead Sea has never, during the last 40-odd years, made peace with the other. But then again, the soil here has witnessed incessant conflict since the very beginning of recorded history. Too many gods, it seems, have clashed here, demanding blood sacrifice from their adherents. The ruins of Qumran, that's spelled Qumran, or to be more accurate, Khirbet Qumran, Khirbet, appear to the right, just as the road reaches the cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea. Thereafter, the road bends to follow the cliffs southwards, along the shore of the water, towards the side of the fortress of Masada, 33 miles away. Qumran stands on a white terrace of marl, 100 feet or so above the road, slightly more than 1.25 miles from the Dead Sea. The ruins themselves are not very prepossessing. One is first struck by a tower, 2 floors of which remain intact, with walls 3 feet thick, obviously built initially with defense in mind. Adjacent to the tower are a number of cisterns, large and small, connected by a complicated network of water channels. Some may have been used for ritual bathing. Most, however, if not all, would have been used to store the water the Qumran community needed to survive here in the desert. Between the ruins and the Dead Sea, on the lower levels of the Marl Terrace, lies an immense cemetery of some 1,200 graves. Each is marked by a long mound of stones aligned, contrary to both Judaic and Muslim practice, north to south. Even today, Qumran feels remote, though several hundred people live in a nearby kibbutz, and the place can be reached quickly and easily by a modern road running to Jerusalem, a drive of some 20 miles in 40 minutes. Okay, 20 miles. Day and night, huge articulated lorries thunder along the road, which links Eilat in the extreme south of Israel with Tiberias in the north. Tourist buses stop regularly, disgorging sweating Western Europeans and Americans who are guided briefly around the ruins, then to an air-conditioned bookshop and restaurant for coffee and cakes. There are, of course, numerous military vehicles, but one also sees private cars, both Israeli and Arab, with their different colored number plates. One even sees the occasional boy racer in a loud, badly built Detroit monster, whose speed appears limited only by the width of the road. The Israeli army is, needless to say, constantly in sight. This, after all, is the West Bank, and the Jordanians are only a few miles away, across the Dead Sea. Patrols run day and night, cruising at 5 miles per hour, scrutinizing everything, small lorries usually, with 3 heavy machine guns on the back, soldiers upright behind them. These patrols will stop to check the cars and ascertain the precise whereabouts of anyone exploring the area, or excavating on the cliffs or in the caves. The visitor quickly learns to wave, to make sure the troops see him and acknowledge his presence. It is dangerous to come upon them too suddenly, or to act in any fashion that might strike them as furtive or suspicious. The kibbutz Kalia is a 10-minute walk from Qumran up a short road from the ruins. There are also 2 small schools for the local children, a large communal refectory, and housing units resembling motels for overnight tourists. But this is still a military zone. The kibbutz is surrounded by barbed wire and locked at night. An armed patrol is always on duty, and there are numerous air raid shelters deep underground. These double for other purposes as well. One, for example, is used as a lecture hall, another as a bar, a third as a discotheque. But the wastes beyond the perimeter remain untouched by any such modernity. Here the Bedouins still shepherd their camels and their goats, seemingly tireless figures linking the present with the past. In 1947, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, Qumran was very different. At that time, the area was part of the British Mandate of Palestine. To the east lay what was then the Kingdom of Transjordan. The road that runs south along the shore of the Dead Sea did not exist, extending only to the Dead Sea's northwestern quarter, a few miles from Jericho. Around and beyond it, there were only rough tracks, one of which followed the course of an ancient Roman road. This route had long been in total disrepair. Qumran was thus rather more difficult to reach than it is today. The sole human presence in the vicinity would have been the Bedouin, herding their camels and goats during the winter and spring, when the desert perhaps surprisingly yielded both water and grass. In the winter, or possibly the early spring of 1947, it was to yield something more, one of the 2 or 3 greatest archaeological discoveries of modern times. The precise circumstances attending the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls have already passed into legend. In a number of particulars, this legend is probably not entirely accurate, and scholars were bickering over certain points well into the 1960s. It remains, however, the only account we have. The original discovery is ascribed to a shepherd boy, Muhammad ad-Dib, or Muhammad the Wolf, a member of the Ta'amirch tribe of Bedouin. He himself later claimed he was searching for a lost goat. Whatever he was doing, his itinerary brought him clambering among the cliffs at Qumran, where he discovered an opening in the cliff face. He tried to peer inside, but from where he stood, he could see nothing. He then tossed a stone into the blackness, which elicited a sound of breaking pottery. This, needless to say, impelled him to further exploration. Hoisting himself upward, he crawled through the aperture, then dropped down to find himself in a small cave, high-ceilinged and narrow, no more than 6 feet wide and perhaps 24 long. It contained a number of large earthenware jars, about 2 feet tall and 10 inches wide, many of them broken. 8 are generally believed to have been intact, though the quantity has never been definitively established. According to his own account, Muhammad became frightened, hauled himself back out of the cave, and fled. The next day he returned with at least one friend and proceeded to explore the cave and its contents more closely. Some of the earthenware jars were sealed by large bowl-like lids. Inside one of them, there were 3 leather scrolls wrapped in decaying linen, the first of the Dead Sea Scrolls to see the light in nearly 2,000 years. During the days that followed, the Bedouin returned to the site, and at least 4 more leather rolls were found. At least 2 jars were removed and used for carrying water. When proper archaeological excavation began, it revealed a substantial number of sherds and fragments, enough, according to reliable estimates, to have constituted no fewer than 40 jars. There is no way of knowing how many of these jars, when first discovered, were empty and how many actually contained scrolls. Neither is there any way of knowing how many scrolls were taken from the cave and, before their significance became apparent, secreted away, destroyed, or used for other purposes. Some, it has been suggested, were burned for fuel. In any case, we were told that more scrolls were taken from the cave than have previously been recorded, or than have subsequently come to light. Altogether, a total of 7 complete scrolls were to find their way into the public domain, along with fragments of some 21 others. At this point, accounts begin to grow increasingly contradictory. Apparently, however, thinking the scrolls might be of some value, 3 Bedouin took all they had found, 3 complete parchments, according to some sources, 7 or 8, according to others, to a local sheikh. He passed the Bedouin on to a Christian shopkeeper and dealer in curios and antiques, one Khalil Iskander Shaheen, known as Kondo. Kondo, a member of the Syrian Jacobite Church, contacted another church member residing in Jerusalem, George Isaiah. According to reliable scholars, Kondo and Isaiah promptly ventured out to Qumran themselves and removed a number of additional scrolls and/or fragments. Such activities were, of course, illegal by the law of the British Mandate, a law subsequently retained by both Jordanian and Israeli governments. All archaeological discoveries belonged officially to the state. They were supposed to be turned over to the Department of Antiquities, then housed in the Palestine Archaeological Museum, known as the Rockefeller, in Arab East Jerusalem. But Palestine was in turmoil at the time, and Jerusalem, a city divided into Jewish, Arab, and British sectors. In these circumstances, the authorities had more pressing matters to deal with than a black market in archaeological relics. In consequence, Kondo and Isaiah were free to pursue their clandestine transactions with impunity. I'll just say that so far, the story, I'm certainly not leaving it off the table that this is just an op. That, it just sounds like it was set up by MI5 or something like that, because the Nag Hammadi texts, which are mostly texts of New Testament, of gospel stories and stuff that were discovered in Egypt just 2 years before this, like 1945. I could see MI6 just trying to, conjure up some kind of way that they could mess around with everybody's religion. But, I would probably be humiliated if I actually saw the site. I don't know how easy it is to fake a 2,000-year-old scroll. It probably isn't very easy. So unless MI5 is like way better than CIA or something like that, then they probably wouldn't be able to pull this off. But I certainly am going to have that in the back of my mind as we proceed further. Samuel later said he first learned of the Dead Sea Scrolls in April 1947. If chronology has hitherto been vague and contradictory, however, it now becomes even more so, varying from commentator to commentator. But sometime between early June and early July, Samuel requested Kondo and George Isaiah to arrange a meeting with the 3 Bedouin who'd made the original discovery to examine what they found. When the Bedouin arrived in Jerusalem, they were carrying at least 4 scrolls and possibly as many as 8. The 3 they'd originally found themselves, plus one or more, from whatever they or Kondo and George Isaiah had subsequently plundered. Unfortunately, the Metropolitan had neglected to mention the Bedouins' impending visit to the monks at the monastery of St. Mark. When the Bedouin appeared with their dirty, crumbling, and ragged parchments, themselves unshaven and insalubrious looking, the monk at the gate turned them away. By the time Samuel learned of this, it was too late. The Bedouin, understandably resentful, wanted nothing further to do with Metropolitan Samuel. One of them even refused to have any further dealings with Kondo and sold his portion of the scrolls, a third share, which amounted to 3 scrolls, to the Muslim Sheikh of Bethlehem. Kondo managed to purchase the shares of the remaining scrolls and sold them in turn to the Metropolitan for a reported £24. This cache was believed at first to consist of 5 scrolls, but proved eventually to contain only 4, one of them having broken in 2. Of the 4 texts, one was a well-preserved copy of the book of Isaiah from the Old Testament, the parchment of which unrolled to a length of 24 feet. The other 3, according to the nomenclature later adopted by scholars, included the, quote, Genesis Apocryphon, a commentary on the book of Habakkuk, and the so-called community rule. Shortly after the Bedouins' abortive visit to Jerusalem, in late July, according to some reports, in August, according to others, Metropolitan Samuel sent priests to return with George Isaiah to the cave at Qumran. Being engaged in illicit activities, the pair worked by night. They examined the site at length and found at least 1 additional jar and some fragments. They also conducted, apparently, some fairly extensive excavations. When the first official research party reached the location a year later, they discovered an entire section of the cliff face had been removed, making a large entrance into the cave below the smaller hole originally explored by the Bedouin. What this enterprise may have yielded remains unknown. In researching this book, we interviewed certain people who insisted that George Isaiah, during the course of his nocturnal explorations, found a number of other scrolls, some of which have never been seen by scholars. Having obtained at least some of the scrolls, Metropolitan Samuel undertook to establish their age. He first consulted a Syrian expert working at the Department of Antiquities. In this man's opinion, the scrolls were of fairly recent date. The Metropolitan then consulted a Dutch scholar working with the École Biblique et Archéologique Française de Jerusalem, an institution run by Dominican monks and financed in part by the French government. He was intrigued, but remained skeptical about the scroll's antiquity, describing subsequently how he returned to the École Biblique and consulted a prominent scholar there who lectured him about the prevalent forgeries floating around amongst dodgy antique dealers. So, I guess somebody was trying to fake it. As a result, he abandoned his research on the matter, and the École Biblique lost its opportunity to get involved at the beginning. Only the relatively untutored Metropolitan at this point seems to have had any inkling of the scroll's age, value, and significance. Okay, let's try to do one or two more paragraphs. In September 1947, the Metropolitan took the scrolls in his possession to his superior, the Patriarch of the Syrian Jacobite Church in Homs, north of Damascus. What passed between them is not known, but on his return, the Metropolitan again dispatched a party of men to excavate the cave at Qumran. Presumably, he was acting on the Patriarch's instructions. In any case, he obviously believed there was more to be discovered. Metropolitan Samuel's visit to Syria in September had coincided with the arrival there of Miles Copeland, who had joined the OSS during the Second World War, had remained with that organization when it became the CIA, and went on to become a long-serving operative and station chief. In a personal interview, Copeland told how in the autumn of 1947, he had just been posted to Damascus as the CIA's representative there. In the circumstances then prevailing, there was no need to operate under particularly deep cover, and his identity seems to have been pretty much an open secret. According to Copeland, a sly Egyptian merchant came to see him one day and claimed to possess a great treasure. Reaching into a dirty sack, the man pulled out a scroll, the edges of which were already disintegrating. Fragments were flaking off into the street. When he asked what it was, Copeland, of course, wouldn't say. If the merchant left it with him, however, he promised he would photograph it and get someone to study it. In order to photograph it, Copeland and his colleagues took the scroll up on the roof of the American legation in Damascus and stretched it out. There we go. The incompetence of the undercover agents. A strong wind was gusting at the time, Copeland remembered, and pieces of the scroll peeled away, wafted over the roof and into the streets of the city to be lost forever. According to Copeland, a substantial portion of the parchment vanished in this manner. Copeland's wife, an archaeologist herself, said she could not help wincing every time she heard the story. Yeah, likely story. Okay, well, we're going to stop right there, and we're going to take over tomorrow at this spot. So come on back. Thanks for tuning in today.